magnetic motors that are built with high-tech space-age materials and employ microprocessors to regulate pulsations and RPM. David Porter of Galtech Semiconductors demonstrates his recently patented permanent magnet motor called the Carousel electric generator.
This is the latest version of the Carousel motor generator. It's a rotary version. Rotary inside. There's 18 separate sections, what we call a coil section in here. 18 make up the outer diameter. There's 6 coils here that we're using to drive the motor. On the top here we have an encoder which sends a pulse down to the electronics and basically lets the electronics know where the rotor, the rotating part here, is in relationship to the coils and tells the coils when to turn on and off. That's done by a specific index point that the encoder has that sets the relationship between the two. And the electronics down here in the box is basically a set of TTL logic counters. It counts the number of pulses from the encoder, and it turns the power on and off to different coils depending on where the rotor is at the time. We have also hooked up to this system a connection to the computer over here. What it gives us the opportunity to do is change the duty cycle on the system. We can change it from a pulse rate of 1 pulse per cycle up to 40 pulses per cycle, which would be 100% duty cycle. That is incorporated in, and what we do is change the pulse rate on the computer. It downloads the data to the electronics. When the index pulse comes around, which comes around once per revolution, it updates the data in the counters, and that's what changes the pulse rate on the system. Okay, we don't have an automatic start on the system right now. That's something that the Intel chip will do. We'll start it up at a pulse rate of approximately 13 pulses, which gives us a 16% duty cycle. It takes a while to spool up because, like I say, it works also as its own flywheel. So we build up the power gradually. The thing about this system is that everything floats on the magnetic field in there. You have very little internal friction. Once the system gets up to speed, it stabilizes at a certain RPM. Right now we're running at about a 30% duty cycle per channel. The speed is still coming up a little bit. Calculate the speed off of the scope here, and we're running about 1,850 RPM. This white and the green shows the 2 channels on the motor. The little spikes there are the amount of time that each channel is on, and the flat part at the bottom is the amount that it's off. So you can see how much is pulsing and how much time it's off and how much time it's on. One of the analogies we like to use is it's like if you pick someone up and take them across the street, you use a lot of energy. If you put them in a tire, once you get it started, all you got to do is tap it a little bit. And so you use a lot less energy to move the same load. And that's what we do. We build it up to a high speed, and then we just tap it with a little juice as it goes around. And we use the inertia built into the system to take it the rest of the way there. So we're using a high-speed pulse on the system. What we're doing is removing the energy from the magnet. The magnet has a specific life. They lose approximately 1% a year. So we're not actually trying to create energy from nothing. The system will not run forever. It's not perpetual motion. We use the amount of energy that is in the magnets. Once that energy is used up, the magnets can be taken out. They can be recharged. All we're doing is maximizing the efficiency of the electromagnetic flux density that's there to the production of electrical output.
When will we be able to see free energy devices powering consumer products like this electric car? Well, they're already here, and you may be able to purchase one by the time you see this program.
In Oklahoma, where oil has been king for over a century, inventor Troy Reed has been busy in his shop constructing rotating magnetic motors that he believes will soon revolutionize how we get around.
And it does work. This is a new prototype of the magnetic motor, and if I can explain a little bit about what you call a magnetic field. All magnets, the big old wooden prototype, has a system. As the motor went over, it had a tension to jerk over like that. If you take this motor here and you take your finger and rotate it, it doesn't have that jerking in it. So what I've done, I got rid of the crankshaft. I've got rid of the injectors, and the system in this motor here, as you crank this motor up, and like you do the other one, the motor will start running, and what I'll do, I'll energize it on this motor here. If you can see these amp gauges over here, this will come, when we get it up to about 150 volts, we'll unplug it and we'll turn the light on. If you turn this around where you can see this side here, all the working parts is behind this system here, operates from a little computer. Takes just 5 volts. It's 150 volts. What we're going to do, turn off all the switches, make sure there ain't nothing plugged into it. There's the plug. There's your 110 volts. Motor still running. You can operate this table plumb around. Still got energy running. Nothing tied up in the back of it. Nothing on the floor. Rotate around, still running electricity. So we're looking, hoping this time next year that you'll be able to use it in your home. So that's another. And what's good about this, you're talking about electric automobiles, this right here can set it in the back of an electric automobile and generate electricity and charge batteries up in a car. Beautiful automobile. You can drive it anywhere you want to. You don't pollute the air. All the other electric automobiles that I've actually seen has been nothing but just standard transmission. This is an automatic transmission car. There's not a whole lot of what you call junk, I would call, under cars. I've seen a lot of electric cars that had a lot of stuff in it. The only thing that this has a battery to run the radio, the blower. We've got 2 safety switches over here that can be mounted into an enclosed system, but we did this where you could see, where people can see this car with the technology. It's a safety switch system. This is a controller box, a Curtis control box. It cuts the amperage down. So with the amperage, here's what's real good about electric automobiles. All electric automobiles that have surge technology with this in it, they create heat. They've got to have a fan to blow this Curtis controller off because it gets hot. We don't want that to get hot. We want to stay that cold, because once it stays cold, you save on all the computer chips that's in this controller. So that means you can go farther, longer, and you won't have no problems. This electric automobile has got 2 gauges in front of the shifter on the automatic transmission. It's called the voltage and the amperage. That's what I was talking about earlier about amperage on automobiles. Let's see if we can't get the amperage to go down instead of going up. The voltage on this here should say somewhere around 120 volts. When we start out, there's no amperage at all. So the gauges is down below here, and we're getting ready to take and go drive the car. and you can see for yourself what it does. All you do is just take and put it in gear, and the motor sounds like a little sports car. Shifts, runs good, fantastic automobile, drives. If you'll see the amperage on the gauge, see it going down? Amperage goes way down. That's what I like about electric cars. If you floorboard the car, the most it will do would just be about maybe 100 amps. And that's what we want to do, is to keep the amperage down on an electric car. So it'll go anywhere really anybody wants to go. If you want to take a trip, you don't have to worry about going go plug in the house, because it's called the Surge technology. It's a beautiful automobile, and I love it, and I've put a lot of hard work in this car, and we're going to make it. No oil, no gas to fool with. And the technology is here. It's going to be here. It's going to go. It's going to work beautiful for the whole world, for mankind. See you around. This is your future, people.
As we have seen so far, electromagnetism seems to be offering the most viable path for many contemporary inventors. The magnetic motor continues to challenge the over-unity barrier, but even simpler methods are being demonstrated through common ingenuity. Dennis Lee of Better World Technology has been struggling to pursue his dream of achieving energy independence for everyone on the planet. Held in prison for 2 years without ever being convicted of a crime, Lee mounts public demonstrations in major U.S. cities, lining up individual dealerships to market his devices. A controversial figure who some dismiss as a fraud and others see as legitimate if outspoken P.T. Barnum of free power to the people, Lee has assembled an impressive line of prototypes and processes, including those by other inventors like Yul Brown. Although he claims his machines are not utilizing zero-point energy because they draw heat from the surrounding air, his numerous devices supposedly achieve super efficiency rates by recycling excess energy through closed-loop systems.
I built the world's most efficient heat pump and developed it, and these are the evaporators for that heat pump right here. They're 8 feet high, 3 feet wide. Now, the refrigerant we put in here boils at 40 degrees below zero. Therefore, anytime, day or night, outside in a rainstorm or in a windstorm or hailstorm or a snowstorm, or just out on a nice hot sunny day or in the middle of a cold night, as long as the refrigerant that's inside this panel is colder than whatever the air is out here or the phenomenon that's hitting this panel, then the heat from the air or the sun or the wind or the rain or the sleet or the snow will be transferred into the refrigerant on the other side, because it's the second law of thermodynamics. Hot goes to cold. So if this is the coldest thing outside, anything out there that touches it is going to give its heat to it. A little bit of heat goes a long way. That gas starts expanding like crazy, and as it expands, it then is drawn into the compressor, not through suction. I've got engineers and inventors that don't like to use the term suction, but through negative pressure. So as the compressor is creating this negative pressure, the gas is migrating to it. And so a compressor is a gas pump. It'll pump gas. And so the gas is being pumped by the compressor into the compressor, elevated in temperature. And even though if you touch this panel, it's ice cold to your hand, and if you touch the line going out of the panel, it's still ice cold to your hand. When it hits that compressor takes all the gas in this space, puts it in that space, elevates the pressure and the temperature. Going out of the compressor, do not touch that line whenever that thing is on, because it's 200 to 250 degrees hot. And so that's where we get the heat. All of the heat is transferred in here. We then use a compressor to take the relatively useless energy that we've got and elevate the temperature and pressure and make it very useful energy. Then that heat would be transferred later. This is a direct drive compressor. This direct drive compressor takes Freon from the panels, and it runs that because this direct drive is causing the pistons to go up and down. That gives us heat into the boiler. The boiler expands the other Freon back through that into a double-acting piston that's going back and forth. We're converting with mechanical apparatuses, we're converting that into shaft rotation. That shaft rotation turns this wheel. As this wheel turns, it causes the compressor to turn. As the compressor supplies the heat, it causes this wheel to turn. You might say these two wheels are powering each other. And by the way, once the Freon has taken the heat, it then made the power, it then goes up here. This is a condenser. We're sucking water out of the bottom of the tank, could be the well. And we're running the water through this pump right here that's also driven by the same drive mechanism, running the water into this condenser. It's the world's most efficient condenser at 100 degree delta T, 6 million BTUs. And as we're then running the water through, we're making the water hotter, but the water will also be being pumped. And as I do this, I'll show you the water being pumped. And then also, we're cooling down the Freon, which is going into this canister and is being pumped right back into the boiler by a little trombone pump that's running on the same cylinder. You ready to try it? Let's go ahead and try it. Let's turn it on, guys. Okay, if you're ready, Maestro, anytime you're ready. Okay. So it is pumping water from energy taken out of the air, and we'll light the lights too from excess energy. So the lights are being lit from excess energy from the air. They're pulsing. It wasn't set up to do that, so we don't have it stable, but we thought we'd just demonstrate the excess power that we have. Main thing is it's pumping water. It's supposed to be pumping water. That's a closed loop because it's continuing to go through the boiler and in back. I had a heat pump in a walk-in freezer. We cranked the temperature down to 20 degrees below zero in dead airspace. Now imagine this, if you got any background in refrigeration, we're in dead airspace, the temperature's 20 below zero. We did it every single Saturday for an entire year. People from all over the world came to see it. We said, bring your own test equipment, take the thing apart if you want to. We had a $10,000 challenge to find any gimmick or anything in it. And every single weekend, we cranked the temperature down to 20 below in dead airspace, and we made water hot enough to burn your hand from energy we took out of that box at 20 below at a 2-to-1 COP. Same average performance of the GE heat pump in America. Only it's 20 below in dead airspace. And we challenged all the heat pump manufacturers to come anytime you want to, either find a hoax with us or bring your unit down and see if you can do that. Nobody ever came. A lot of customers came, lots of people from all over the world came, Pakistan, everywhere. So anyway, we're in here testing this every year, every weekend for a year. And a man came to the show one day, and what a guy this was. Now, we're trying to build this thing. It's going to take 2 years and $2 million, and I'm raising capital selling heat pump things to get the money. And a guy walks in, and he comes up to me at the end of the show, and he says, Mr. Lee, I am absolutely astonished. I want to shake your hand, and I want to tell you, I have no doubt you have got the best heating system in the world. Yours tops everything out there from solar all the way down the line. You did it. But you need to know me. You know why you need to know me? Because I have built the world's most efficient heat engine, and you have got the world's most efficient heat source. He says, if we got together with our two technologies, we could become the most dangerous men in the world. I thought, wow, I've never been the most dangerous man in the world. I've kind of wanted to be. And so, you see, this man's name was Dr. Fisher. Now, this guy proved that they built the steam engine wrong. I had the pleasure of building his unit in my research lab. And we took his great big unit, because why wouldn't I want a great big one? I don't want to put everybody on the grid system with a new system that can exploit them some more with all the arrogance that comes with it. I wanted to give people the opportunity to be totally independent of the grid system. Remember, that was my goal. So we took the big one we had and we scaled it down into a model not much, a little bit smaller than this one. It was a little smaller than this. It was about that long. It's about 13 inches long, 6 inches in diameter. And that one was going to be big enough to be able to power all the energy you needed for your house, and so I didn't want one bigger than that. And by the way, that little unit could fit in the glove compartment of any American-made car. I went across the United States of America telling my story. I told it in every state of the United States, and I got 1,000 people to join me telling my story. We put a media ad campaign together because the media wouldn't cover it, so we ran commercials. And we did a 60-second commercial cutting a power line and saying you can power your house with no electricity, external electricity, run your car with a new engine that runs with no gasoline. We did a 60-second commercial nationwide. As far as we can tell, about 10 million people saw it. And after that happened, that was too much. That couldn't be tolerated. And so I got a letter from the state of California inviting me to come back to California to go to court. So I flew back from New Jersey to California to go to court, and when I walked into the court, the judge said, "You're probably wondering why you're here," and I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, because I've been ordered by the state of California to put you in prison." And I said, "Well, that's really interesting. You're putting me in prison, but I've never been convicted of the crime. How do I go to prison without a trial and without being convicted?" And I said, "You can't do that, can you?" And he said, "Well," he says, "I've been ordered by the state of California to put you in prison, so that's where you're going, but sounds like you got a hell of a case for appeal." That, by the way, is a quote, and I do have the transcript. I walked out of prison 2 years ago, and now we have rebuilt our whole national network of distribution of distributors. We're in every state of the United States. We're in every major county of the United States. We have people now who understand exactly how the government works, exactly how the big boys work, exactly how the energy companies work, and we've got it all figured out. And we've got far, far, far more technology than we ever had in 1987. We got a lot more money than we ever had in 1987, and we're about to rock your world.
As if the amazing over-unity results of these pioneering inventions are not enough, a curious combination of side effects to free energy research involves such things as the transmutation of metals, the formation of new isotopes, and yes, even anti-gravity. Levitation effects from spinning magnetic disks conjure up images of UFOs hovering in midair. British inventor John Searle has led the way along these lines, but his technique is not the only approach. The remarkable works of Canadian inventor John Hutchison has drawn widespread attention from businessmen and government scientists since 1979, when he began using ultra-high electromagnetic frequencies to transform matter in some very unusual ways. It has come to be known as the Hutchison effect.
The objects you're seeing moving there is a form of levitation by translational movement, meaning that the objects become lighter and can float around. The heaviest being the barium cylinder that you see there with the two wires coming out of it. Tends to slide around on 7 pounds of its own weight. The physics of it is self-resonation of what they call ferromagnetic and piezoelectric barium titanate through a power amplifier and broad and narrow bands of electrical energy going into this crystal. So the applications of this in advanced applications using free energy or zero-point energy to power it would be in propulsion technologies. This is a crystal converter unit that I made about a year ago to see if the principle worked, and indeed it seems to work to this day. The principles involve the Casimir effect and space charge type of barrier technology in semiconductors, and a jitter activity called zero-point energy that goes through time and space. The idea is to get the material inside this to interface with the jittering action of zero-point energy. And moving on to what they may look like inside, I actually bring out a piece here of this material, of common minerals and that, produced in a special way, and I take a reading here. And I should be getting a higher reading. I had a hot spot somewhere on here. I have here almost a half a volt, as you can see. As one can see, there's no batteries in this or anything else except this crystalline material with different configurations. And this is a steady state. It's always that, and has been tested up to a year's time and under stress tests also. So, which made me decide to then, of course, mount the same material in cylinders. Different cylinders, of course, there are different mixes in there, and I found that that some of the cylinders are not as powerful as this material here, or this very tiny one here. Actually, this has more power than this large artillery shell unit here. And what I want to do, of course, is to demonstrate it in the sense of it making actual power. And that means to turn a small motor. Okay, I'm attaching this to the base here. Another lead to the top, and it should spin, which it does. So yeah, basically, this kind of material powering motors. Of course, it's a very small motor at this time, but scaled up in larger amounts of material can power up to several horsepower if needed.
Hutchison hopes his simple shake-and-bake method of producing these crystal energy converters will attract investors who can see the potential of permanent batteries which never need charging.
Non-toxic, that will interface with zero-point energy in space and time.
Hutchison's more dramatic experiments border on the paranormal and have generated more than just a passing interest from U.S. military research labs.
We've had about 750 demonstrations of levitation, translational movements, metallurgical samples falling apart, changing into transmuted unknown metals, quite a variety of obscure types of effects, wood impregnated into metals, other objects in metals, monopole magnetic fields written up in many journals. Quite a host, or a Pandora's box, of different types of effects on the outer edge of the scientific community.
In this remarkable series of video clips shot by Hutchison, we see what happens when he fine-tunes the electromagnetic frequencies aimed at target objects in his garage.
On the subatomic level, I feel that there is a dimension shift activated by very conventional electrostatics, RF fields that I use, and Tesla waves that I use, that actually form a keyway that opens up another area of time and space that may activate the zero-point energy fields and interdimensional reactions, let's say, to gravitational waves and time waves, or chronons, if you wish. Perhaps we're dealing in chronons and gravitons, which are maybe particles, and somehow causing a distortion, which causes objects to simply break apart or pulsate in the center of stainless steel bars and fall apart, or to become weightless.
And also frustrating about his invention is that he's using a combination of Tesla coil and Van de Graaff to produce a very disruptive and lifting experiments, which in one case, for example, actually lifts a 19-pound bushing toward the ceiling just from electromagnetic fields. Now, when we analyze that, we find that there's position versus time graph that we can plot, and also the velocity versus time. But when we actually analyze the acceleration versus time, it's an increasing straight line. So we're forced as scientists to admit that we have a third derivative effect, which, for my mind, actually lends itself to an anomalous new force, which I call hyperforce, because we have to take a derivative of that to finally get a flat, straight line, a constantly increasing acceleration. So the Hutchinson effect has been used as a benchmark for a comparison to many other high-voltage propulsion devices. Electrogravity, in other words.
Now that we've witnessed the awesome potential of these revolutionary new energy sources, some interesting questions begin to surface. What are the consequences to the environment, to the very fabric of space-time itself, once we begin harnessing these little understood forces on a planetary scale? Remember the promise of nuclear energy, that electricity would be too cheap to meter? Are there downsides to tapping free energy that we may not be able to predict until it may be too late?
We have effects which can get down now into the very fundamental thing that drives everything, the mind stuff, the connection of the mind to the body and everything. For example, if you were to generate extreme pulses, extreme powerful pulses of this so-called scalar potential stuff with the hidden internal stuff, if you jerk that hard enough, you jerk the normal smooth flow of time stream, and what you really do is you snap the body loose from its mind connection. You jerk the two loose from each other. That's instantaneous death at every level. Every cell dies, every germ dies, every paramecium dies, every virus dies, the whole body dies. So obviously if you're going to try to think of energy in those enormous amounts, you're going to have to be extremely careful. You can't do that just willy-nilly without risking terrible effects from it. So there are some limitations that will emerge on this technology.
There is a danger, however, that you may tap too much zero-point energy, and then, of course, these things would heat up and explode, which has happened a few times with these devices of mine. So, in essence, it's an interesting technology to get involved in, but I notice that there's some precautions one needs to take. If you're having too much drawing from the electromagnetic jitter of zero-point energy, you're going to get a minor meltdown. And I had to clean this area out here once because of a minor meltdown.
Would a new energy source be dangerous, for example? I would say, of course, you have to respect it. I mean, it's energy, so therefore, it's always potentially dangerous. It's double-edged. And I think it would take a healthy respect to investigate it. One should be cautious, and that's very reasonable. I've heard some good things. I've heard there could be health effects. There could be good effects as well as the potential for detrimental effects. I think it's like anything else. It's energy. It could be used for good. It could be used for bad. It's up to us.
Perhaps because of their traditional understanding of invisible forces like chi or ki, Oriental cultures, especially the techno-enthusiastic Japanese, embraced the concept of free energy. Well-respected scientists like Shinichi Seki and Seifuji Inomata are receiving substantial government and industry support.
Meanwhile, the Japanese, of course, are beginning to commercially develop various systems. For example, a Japanese consortium funds the Pons and Fleshman work. The Japanese Toshiba Corporation is working with Inomata, and various other corporations are coming together to develop free energy options. And of course, Japan has no vested interest in oil. They don't have any domestic source. So it's in their best interest to be the first kid on the block to make little gizmos that will replace our circuit breakers and internal combustion engines.
To understand this machine, you need mind change, paradigm shift yourself. So far, physics, ordinary science, consider only material world. But we should think another world, as an unseen world. And we should recognize that unseen world and material world is connected. This energy comes from the other dimension.
We'll really have a true science when it is accepted in science, and a true technology when all the phenomenology is thoroughly worked out and thoroughly understood, when all the models are redone so that we adequately can model this theoretically and we can do engineering. We can sit down and design the circuits. They'll work every time. We'll have components on the shelf we can buy, assemble, and they work. We're not at that stage today. We are at a stage today which is the birth of the baby. We're not at the stage where it's already a teenager running around playing baseball on the baseball lot. We're at the birth of the baby, and the birth is very difficult because it's opposed by so many interests. The orthodox scientific community still very adamantly oppose it because they think that it's nonsense. They think that it's this old idea of perpetual motion in a closed system, creating energy from nothing. And that is nonsense. You can't do that. There are very strong and very powerful economic interests in the world, probably the strongest economic interest in the world, which are adamantly opposed to it. Can you see what this does to the oil-rich nations? Can you see what this will do to many things? Now, actually, what it'll do, you'll phase the oil. Petrochemical industry won't go away. You still need the oil for the materials that's in it and the chemicals. And so it'll be more and more petrochemical industry rather than keep burning and wasting the oil and putting all the pollutants in the biosphere. So many things will readjust. It's going to wrest control from a lot of the great wealthy control barons who now dominate largely the economic world. And their world is going to change. Now, what you're going to see, I would predict, and we'll see if history bears this out, when those barons really realize that this stuff is for real and it can be made to work, and with the internet and with free publishing and computers and everything, they can no longer contain the information. And it's very embarrassing to keep killing the inventors. They stopped that about 15 years ago. At some point, you're going to see an overwhelming availability of funds become available. When the funds become available, the scientists will change over into it because they go where the money goes. They're bought and paid for, simple as that. You can't do research unless you got the funds. You cut off the research grants, professor gets without a job. He leaves the university. And so science is simply bought and paid for in this country and much of the world. When the money goes, the science will go to it. Now that will put the sharp young graduate student on it finally with some funds to do the experiments and work on their doctorates and so forth. You will have a very rapid assimilation and advancement of a totally new and extended electromagnetic science at the time.
You get to a certain stage in scientific development, sometimes to stages where you're faced with problems and barriers and you sort of forced to rethink and go in different directions. I think we're seeing that one of those peculiar time periods in the history of science where we're going to overturn some cherished models, not too much, but make some changes, and they'll open the door to an enormous amount of new technology in electricity and magnetism, in nuclear reactions, in motor development, in battery applications, in space flight, and perhaps in anti-gravity. I think there are, in creating scarce elements from plentiful elements, I think we have just reached a plateau now where the world's door is opening to, what, a millennium of new science?
We're talking about real-life hardware. We're talking about experiments in science that are telling us beyond any reasonable doubt that we have technologies that will enable us to be free from the bondage that we now feel, free from some of these economic constraints that we've created for ourselves. Because you see, if energy is free, and it will be very shortly, food is free, housing is free, then we're free to create express our creative gifts and not be like drones and we're also free to explore our greater selves. And it's going to be a very exciting time coming up.
The future of the world, as seen by conventional thinkers or even many far-reaching thinkers, is tame compared to what cold fusion and free energy is going to do. No aspect of human culture will be untouched by this energy revolution. The very fact that the material that covers 70% of the planet's surface will now be available as a fuel source, and the fact that water makes up a huge percentage of our bodies, and this is a fuel and a source of energy, this is going to have incredible psychological and religious and historical and geopolitical implications. The Middle East picture and the strength of the oil interests there is going to be drastically altered. Air pollution will be abolished in most cities that are now affected by the internal combustion engine. And space travel, which is a favorite subject of mine, will be transformed. The ability to travel to the planets and to the stars will be given a gigantic boost, one that I never in my lifetime expected as an engineer who deals with those things.
Some people are saying that the title of my book, The Coming Energy Revolution, is a bit fearsome, that revolution implies a sudden radical change, and that the status quo will suffer, and that people whose jobs depend on the status quo will suffer. So perhaps evolution is a better way to look at it. But one way or another, our leaders, our political leaders, our business leaders, our utility company executives have to address the changeover to clean energy sources. And it'll probably come from abroad, so it probably will happen fairly fast. I'm not really concerned myself about a radical shift because people seem to be on the verge of readiness for change. A lot of fear, but also some positive anticipation. And maybe it takes an unraveling of what we have to put together a cleaner, more sane world.
Is mankind ready? Do we have the maturity to handle it? Are we giving matches to a baby? That's the question. Well, the first answer is we're kind of backing ourselves against the wall. If we maintain the status quo, we're doomed anyway. It looks like we're going to get a shot by having this energy available to us. If we're not mature enough to handle it, well, I guess we're doomed either way. We have a chance to survive, the chance to go on, but it will take, in a way, a consciousness transformation. Understand there's a consciousness movement and things like that, that people are starting to wake up. It's not just a me game now, it's a we game, and as we learn to work together and have empathy for one another, we can transcend the old selfish consciousness, which has caused all the problems and all the wars and everything else, into a recognition that we are a planetary being.
We've only been able to present a handful of inventors and their remarkable devices in this program. There are hundreds, if not thousands of people worldwide, scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, who are actively working right now, researching and developing this phenomenal technology to the point where it can be successfully scaled up and mass marketed. We are at a pivotal crossroads in human history. Can we as a society release our fears associated with the violence of the past and embrace the unknown? Can we cast aside our rigid skepticism in favor of an open-minded spirit of inquisitiveness? Our very survival may depend on how we answer these questions. We hope we've given you enough of the necessary information with which you may base your future decisions regarding this exciting new field, one that will soon affect all of our lives and the very fate of our planet Earth as well. I'll see you at the finish line. The race is on.
If you were fascinated by the amazing technologies and concepts you've just witnessed, now you can get even more valuable information and details from the New Energy series. 5 full-length videos, 9 hours of in-depth conversations and demonstrations of free energy systems. Explore the worlds of inventors and theoretical physicists who are changing the paradigms of science. Volume 1 features Tom Bearden.
In particle physics, any electrical charge is automatically a broken symmetry. Now what this means is there is a virtual photon flux, a violent flux exchange between the vacuum itself, which is filled with this virtual photon flux.
Volume 2, John Hutchison.
I feel that is also true. I think the Mayan Connect is also a cohere of frequencies and transmit them out and then unlock this doorway into space and time.
This motor here drew 12.5 amps.
Volume 3, Joseph Newman.
This motor right here only draws 7.5 amps. And look at the size of the propeller. Look at the size of the propeller. Look at the size of the motor. Look at the size of the motor. Now this is exactly what I teach throughout my book. I taught it to Dr. Hastings. I've taught it to the world, that the larger you make the mass, then the smaller amount of power it will take and the more power it will produce.
Volume 4 highlights Troy Reed.
This is an old mechanical device. It's got 2 inner wheels on the inside and 2 outer shell wheels with magnets. They got 8 magnets on this side, 8 magnets on the inside here.
Let's see what kind of torque we got at 75 psi.
And Volume 5, Dennis Lee.
Okay, here goes. Maxed it out. So it went all the way off the end of this thing, 150 foot-pounds of torque. This engine.
They're just $29.95 for each tape.
Now the process
or get all
here,
5 for $119.95, a savings of $30. Place your order today. Call 1-800-795-TAPE, T-A-P-E. Or write to Lightworks Audio and Video, Post Office Box 661593, Los Angeles, California, 90066.